So today we're going to be talking about census records. If you have any questions at any point, let me know. I'll do my very best. I'm not perfect, but I will do my best to answer them for you. So starting out, what is a census? It's just it's a counting of any group of people in an area at a time. Um, I'm going to cover that later, actually. So we're going to move ahead. There are lots of different types of censuses. The kind that we think of most frequently is the federal census. So the federal census began in 1790 here in the US. They enumerated heads of household only, and they asked a total of 6 questions. Since that time, it has been kept every 10 years, in years ending with the number 0. And they are available to view after 72 years. So they're trying to protect living individuals, make sure that there's no information about minors that's getting out, that people know shenanigans, right? The next is state censuses. In theory, these were supposed to be collected by the state every 10 years, in years ending with a 5. In practice, that almost never ever happened. The state of New York was really great about their state census records. They tend to be more complete, but most of the time they were kind of collected when the states felt like it. And Indiana, for example, they did one in 1889, but it only covered one county and then a couple of different little townships. So state census records are not always the most helpful, but if you're stuck, it can't hurt to look and see if they're available. Church census records. These were typically done by the government. They took an accounting of what churches were in an area. They wanted to know things like how many ministers or pastors were in the church, how much were they getting paid, was there a school attached to the church, and if so, how many teachers, how many students, what was their salary. They would check congregation demographics. Men, women, children, race, all of those different things. Occasionally, if you had a centralized church with multiple congregations, that church might also conduct its own census to see who's in this congregation. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints they started Family Search, so they're obviously very big into genealogy, so they would keep census records of who's in this congregation at this time. And they can be a really fantastic resource as well. Business and economic censuses. These, again, were taken by the government, and it was kind of about community planning. It helped them to understand what businesses exist in an area, how much business they're doing, what industries are most popular, what are they lacking, and it helped them to kind of figure out, we need more shipbuilders, or we need more grocery stores, or whatever. This kind of helped them figure that out. And it also helped them to identify trends, economic trends. If everything is dropping steeply, they would understand, oh, there's something we need to maybe check out there. Agricultural censuses, these are fantastic if you come from farmers. They only enumerated people who lived on farms or ranches. And they identified the people living in those areas, what technologies they used. So going from like a wooden plow that's dragged by an ox to a steel plow, to mechanized vehicles, irrigation ditches, to motorized sprinkler systems. So it kind of helps you see a little bit about the family that was living there. It kind of gives you a little bit of a glimpse into their life. It's a lot of fun. They started in 1840, so it goes way back. They started doing them every 10 years, and they did them every 10 years until 1920. And then every 5 years from 1925 through 1974. And then the government got involved and decided they needed to kind of take charge. So they're still done every 5 years, but in years ending with a 2 or a 7. So if you come from farm stock, this is your jam. You're going to get some very interesting information. And finally, school censuses. These are not particularly widespread. They would take a counting of the school, Who was the principal? How many teachers? What were the students? Were the students full-time? Were they being taken out of school to work on the family farm? What was going on? But they can be great if you're kind of exhausting other searches. You can kind of infer birth years from what grade your ancestor may have been in. Yearbooks are kind of one of the school census records that I think of. It's not an official, statistics with lines and stuff, but you get kind of an interesting overview of the school. But today, we are only going to talk about the federal census because when most of us think of census records, this is what comes to mind. Information that you're going to find on your census. I wish it was standard across the board, but it's not. It really depends on which census you're looking at. So starting between 1790, when that first census was enumerated here in the US, through 1840, they only named the head of the household, and everyone else is represented by a tick mark. I have an example. This is from I want to say it's the 1820 census from here in Dearborn County. Isaac Dunn was a prominent citizen, so his name is listed as the head of household. And then there were two individuals in this category. I'm going to show you how to find out what the categories mean. But it was like two males between the ages of 1 and 5, two males between the ages of 5 and 10. So you can see who's in the household without seeing who's in the household. And unfortunately, we don't know how they're related either. Were these their children? Were they nieces and nephews? Was it a neighbor child that was living with you temporarily while mom was sick? There's no way for us to determine that, unfortunately. So that's what you're looking at. And some of the earliest census records, if you're going way, way back, they list everybody alphabetically by last name, not necessarily like in order. So that's something to just be aware of. In 1850 through the present, they enumerated everybody by their name, and that may or may not be correct. Some people are listed by a nickname. Sometimes the enumerator would just write down what they heard rather than what's actually correct. I have ancestors who are listed by nicknames, so you kind of got to play fast and loose. 1850 was also the first year that they did a slave schedule. So if you're not familiar with what that is, if you owned slaves, your name was listed. And then just like the census I showed you before, slaves were enumerated by tick marks. You had this many slaves between this age and that age. It's horribly, horribly sad, but it is, especially if you're doing African-American research, it's a great thing to just be aware of. There's only 1850 and 1860, and then of course the Civil War happened and slavery was eliminated. So 1860, this was the first year that American Indians, the Native Americans, were enumerated. And again, that's not necessarily completely factual. In 1860, the US population was 31.4 million people, and they only enumerated 40,000 Native Americans. So whether that was the Native American tribes saying, nope, get off our land, whether it was racism on the part of the governments or the enumerators, we don't know. But that was the first year, so you might get lucky if you have Native American ancestry. It can't hurt to check, but don't be surprised if you do not see it. The 1890 census was unfortunately destroyed in a fire in 1921, much to the lament of genealogists everywhere. I got super excited when I saw that Indiana had a state census from 1889. I thought, oh, that's so exciting because you're going to get around that 1890. No, because it's one county and like 3 or 4 townships from the entire state of Indiana. So don't get your hopes up. There are other ways to kind of get around. So yes, the 1890 census destroyed by fire. So moving on, here we go. 1930 census asks if the family owned a radio. So this was, I think that's an interesting question, but when I ask myself why that might be a question, I started to think, like, before that, news was disseminated through newspaper, right? It might take you days or weeks or even months to get a newspaper, especially if you're looking for news overseas. And this is after the First World War. So understanding having that information was more and more important to families. So in 1930, to have a radio meant that you had access to more information more quickly. So, and it kind of gives you a glimpse. There we go. Okay, hopefully that let Nancy in there. Okay. It also kind of gives you a glimpse into the family's financial situation. Were they well enough off that they could afford a radio? And if not, that kind of, either they were stubborn and just like, I don't wanna, or maybe they were struggling a little bit more financially. Nancy, I'm so sorry. I hope you made it in.
I just did. Yes, thank you.
Perfect, perfect. Okay. 1940. Oh my gosh, you guys, this one was so exciting because for the very first time in 1940, you find out who the informant was. So on previous census records, you don't know who's providing that information to the enumerator. Was it the dad or the mom? Was it their 6-year-old kid? Was it the neighbor down the street because the enumerator couldn't find the person in the house? We don't know. But for the very first time, you could see it's marked with that, it's an X inside a circle. That tells you who the informant was. So generally speaking, if it's somebody inside the household, it's more likely to be correct than if it's not. And if it's someone who's older. So in this case, it was their 20-year-old daughter. So the information is probably fairly accurate. Whether or not she knew her parents' exact ages, it's generally best when it's mom, because mom knows when those babies were born, right? She knows exactly how old those children are. Dads are usually pretty good, but the further and further out you get, these are clues, not fact. Oh, also, the 1940 census asks you where the family was living in 1935. So just kind of putting this in historical context, what happened in 1930? We remember? That was the start of the Depression, right? The Great Depression started, the banks collapsed, a lot of people were out of work. A lot of people had to move to be able to find employment, to provide for their families. So this question, you might have your ancestor in 1930 in one place, in 1940 in a completely different place, and you're kind of wondering why, what happened? So this kind of gives you a clue. So sometimes it'll say same place, sometimes it will say same house. Sometimes they'll be really great and give you the city. Sometimes they'll give you a state. But it gives you just another stepping stone to help you kind of put things in. Yeah.
Excuse me, but Clifford, what is the AD follow the thing?
Probably absent, that he was not there when they enumerated the census. You weren't supposed to do that, but maybe he was just out of town for a weekend or something like that. That's a great, they asked what the AB after Clifford's name there means. That's a great question. All right, 1950. This is the most recent census that has been released. It was released last year. And I know you guys probably didn't care, but oh my gosh, I was so excited to see this census. Genealogists everywhere were very, very excited. This was the very first census in which Americans who were living overseas were enumerated. So members of the military or US government employees who are stationed overseas and their families, this is the first time you're going to see them on a US census. So that's huge, especially if you come from military stock. And after the Second World War, when our military was more spread out and had bases all over the world, that's very, very significant. It also included like fishing vessels. If you're out at sea, you know, for most of the year, you might not be home when the census was enumerated. So this is the first time they started counting those as well. This was also significant because this is the first time they really sat the enumerators down. Like, okay, guys, here are the rules. Let's go over what you're going to ask, how you're going to ask it, what responses are acceptable and unacceptable, how you record it all. There was so much training. So the information that you start seeing in 1950 and onward is going to be much more accurate than censuses before. So just in general, some of the things that you are going to find when you look at a census after they, once they started listing everybody, not just the men, you're going to find names, age, gender, marital status. You'll find their occupation. You might find out the relationship to the head in the house. Were they the spouse? Were they a child, a grandchild, a boarder? All of those different things. Some of them ask very specific questions. Were they able to speak English? Could they read? Could they write? Were they in school? If they were born outside of the country, were they a naturalized citizen or still an alien? So there are lots of really great things that you can find. And sometimes if you dig into censuses, you're going to find some things that are a little bit funny. So I pulled some up just because I think it's funny. This is the 1880 census. Miss Catherine Cudney, her occupation is does as she pleases, which I thought was fantastic. Her dad's a farmer. Her mom keeps house. Her older brother works on the farm. Younger siblings are at school. And Catherine does what she wants. I think we would have been friends. Then sometimes you find things that aren't necessarily as nice. Mr. Patrick Leary is a worthless drinker. So, and yeah, right? Okay, and we just need to talk about Mr. Frank Wilkeson. He was an enumerator in Kansas for the Kansas 1875 state census. And I tell you what, if Frank and I were not going to be friends, nobody ever was. So he had some opinions about some of his neighbors, like Mr. Job Law, who was a loafer, Mr. James Coleman, who was a blowhard, Mr. J.H. Lockwood was a Bible banger. And this one might be my favorite. This is S.O. Wilkeson, who is 2 months old, and notice the surname is exactly the same. I checked, and this is his family that he was enumerating. The baby was a roarer. So I don't know if this baby had colic or just a serious set of lungs, but dad had a sense of humor, and I can appreciate that. So dig into censuses, you're going to find some things. So when we went and we looked at Isaac Dunn, who was represented with the tick marks, there was no marking on that page to tell you what those columns meant. So sometimes when you're looking at a census, the top of the page might be cut off and you don't know what it means, and you need to know what it means, right? So there are a couple of places that you can look. The first is on ancestry.com. You can find blank census forms. I found it by just Googling census templates, and you can look there and pull up a blank form that's typewritten in modern type. So it's very easy to read and understand. And I would not be me if I did not turn you back to the research wiki. So on family search, if you hit that search bar, it brings down this drop down menu. Hit the tab for the research wiki. And then in the box, genealogical or genealogy research forms. This not only has blank copies of census records, it also has pedigree charts, family group sheets, blank templates for the English census and the Ireland census. They have, the wiki is so good. So you can find all of that for free. You can download and print out all of these forms free of charge through Family Search. And they look a little something like that. So it's so much easier to read than it is on some of these census documents that are hard to see. When you are looking at census records, please keep in mind that it is not necessarily accurate. These should be viewed as clues and not hard and fast information, because you don't know who the informant was for most of them. You don't know if it's their given name, a middle name, a nickname, if the enumerator misheard what they were saying. It might be the neighbor who says, I think they had a daughter. She's probably like 6. Her name's like Sally. It's not, it's Margaret. Nobody knows. It could be anything. So view census as a clue, as a jumping in place, but not as fact. When it comes to searching the census, it is all about location. You need to know exactly where to look. Because if you just know my ancestor lived in California in 1930, you're going to be looking for a real long time to find your ancestor in California in 1930. If you can narrow it down to county, or even better, to township. If you can't, there are ways around that. We'll talk about that. But understanding where they came from is important. And it's important not to know where it is now, but where it was when they lived there. So for example, these are just changes in the US Census between 1790 and 1800, when the census began, and 10 years later. There's no West Virginia. Some of these states, the boundaries, like Virginia, Kentucky wasn't even a state. Indiana wasn't a state. West Virginia doesn't exist at all. Boundaries changed a lot. So if your family was living in this area in 1790, you might need to search census records in Virginia to find your ancestor, even though they're not even neighbors anymore. So knowing where it was at the time it was. And here's another example just from here in Indiana. The boundary changes between in 30 years, 1810 to 1840. So knowing where they lived, and there we're going to talk about enumeration maps on my very next slide, but things change. So knowing where they lived. Now let's say you find your ancestor on the 1810 census. Up at the very top of the page, it lists the ED, or the enumeration district, and then you can find it on a map. And then you'll know exactly where within that state they were living. So if boundaries change, you know where exactly on a map where it was, and you can then figure, oh, that's not Virginia anymore. That's now Kentucky, that's now Indiana, that's now Tennessee, whatever. So enumeration district maps are amazing. They're fun to play around with. They are accessible for free through the National Archives. So I went into Google and I just typed in enumeration district map, and it took me right to the National Archive website, and you can pull them all up for free from there. Have I lost anybody yet? We're good? Okay. There are lots of different ways to search census records. A lot of different websites will tie you into censuses. The ones on the left here are free to access. The ones on the right are subscription based. So as much as I love Family Search, it is a little bit cumbersome to get to their census records. If once you find them, it's great, but it's trickier to find them. And by far and away, Ancestry and Ancestry Library are the easiest way to go to search a census record. So Ancestry is unfortunately not inexpensive, but most public libraries have access to Ancestry Library. So you can come in to the library, you can search them for free that way. And I highly recommend Ancestry if you're searching census records. It's just the easiest way to go. But sometimes it pays to be thorough. So this is the exact same entry, the exact same family on Ancestry versus on Fold 3. So sometimes one repository might just have a clearer image than another. So if you have subscriptions, it's sometimes wise to check both. You can come to the library. We have Ancestry, we have Fold 3, we have Family Search, we have all of these different things, and we're more than willing to sit down and help you to search through the census records. And P.S., I saw this particular example in a Roots Tech video, and the presenter of that class said that neither of these are correct. The surname was different than what either one recorded. So again, it's not always correct. Sometimes you have to play around a little bit. I'm going to show you how to search Ancestry because again, I feel like it's the easiest. This is Ancestry Library Edition. So this is the same one that we have access to on these computers over here. If you click on that search bar up at the top, you'll get a drop-down menu. You want to click on Census and Voter Lists. It's pretty easy to find. When you do that, it's going to take you to this page. And then all the way on the right side in that top box, you want to, if you're searching US, which is what I'm showing you today, you want to click that top box. for the US federal census collection. If you just start typing in information about your ancestor, it's going to start looking for people by that name in the US, in Canada, in England, in Australia, all around the world. So you really want to make sure that you limit your search by location. Once you click that button, you want to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page where it will give you this list of censuses that you can search. And again, if you just start typing in information, that's great. You might find your ancestor by name that way, but it's going to start searching through all of these different record types. So if you're looking for your person in 1840, you want to make sure that you click 1840. Once you do that, it's going to bring you to a page that looks just like this. And this is where you start entering your information. Enter first name and last name. Then you're going to type in any information that you might know. When and where they were born. If you don't know when and where they were born, but you know that they lived in Dearborn County, Indiana, you can type that in and it will pull up the census for Dearborn County, Indiana from whatever year we clicked on. If they were an immigrant and arrived in the country, that one is not necessarily helpful because not every census asks that question. So if the census that you're looking for asks that question, this can be great. Otherwise, it's not going to help you. Any event, you can put a year and it will start searching for things. They were born in that year, they died in that year, they were married in that year, they immigrated that year, they had a child that year. So it's a very wide net. Oh, you can also narrow your search a little bit by searching for other family members. So if you know the name of their spouse, if they were married, or if they were living with one of their children, if they were a child and you know the parents' names, you can search with their parents and it will help to start narrowing your search. You can also browse, just if I wanted to look at all, and I did this, and Marina's done this recently actually, if you are looking for, you just want the census for Dearborn County, Indiana, you can pick your state, you can pick your county, you can pick your township. And bless Marina's heart, she did this looking for, we're trying to get connected to the Network to Freedom. So she went through, like, was it 1840, 1850, 1860, or just from 1820, 1820. Wow, she started in 1820, going through all the censuses from Dearborn County looking for mentions of African Americans, so that we can determine where they all lived, where the churches were, where the cemeteries were. So this is, if you're really deep into the research, this is a great tool. So let's talk about some tips and tricks, because sometimes searching a census can be a little bit tricky. You want to work backwards. Start with the most recent census that you can, and then start going backward. Start comparing if they had children. You want to see if the children's ages were roughly 10 years apart. Again, if they're not exact, that's okay. You don't know who the informant was, but you want to see that those relationships are the same. Are they living in the same area? Start working backward. It's a little bit simpler if you do it that way. Less is more. So sometimes people come in and they want to search records and they're going to look for the full name. Mary Elizabeth Roberta Smith. And she was born on this exact day in this exact place. And you push the search button and it comes up with no results. So you want to just maybe get rid of the middle name. Maybe just search with first and last name. You could try just the first initial of their first name and their last name. You can search just by initials. You kind of have to play around a little bit. The Family Search Research Wiki also has a list of nicknames. So if your ancestor had a fairly common name, you might want to see maybe they went by a nickname. So look it up and see. Peggy was a nickname for Margaret. So if your ancestor's name was Margaret, she might be on the census as Peggy. So just sometimes less is a little bit more. You got to play around a little bit. Use a window. You have to let go of this idea of exact dates. You might know exactly, you have a birth record for your ancestor and that's fantastic. The census doesn't care. You got to let it go. Just, this was the year that they were born. And then if that doesn't turn up anything, you can take it out 2 to 3 year window. So it'll give you 2 years before that year, 2 years after that year. And I think it will take you up to as many as 10 years on either side of that date. So you can be searching a very large window of time, but start small and then widen out as needed. Use wildcards. This is going to look a little bit scary. I promise that it's not. I'm going to give you examples. So when you are searching a census record, you can use an asterisk, and that will replace multiple letters within a name. So sometimes, oh my gosh, if they had handwriting tests for enumerators, my life would be so much easier. But sometimes handwriting was sloppy. So things get misread all the time. So if you use an asterisk to be like, it might be, I'll show you an example. It'll make more sense. A question mark can replace a single letter, whereas an asterisk will replace multiple. So here are some examples. Using an asterisk, if you have a P asterisk R, those are just a few of the names that it might pull up. Okay, different numbers of letters. This is really great for, I use this a lot with my Norwegian, or not my Norwegian, my Netherlands research. Once you get up in there and there are lots of SENs and SONs, and they kind of flip back and forth, and sometimes it's SSON, being able to use that asterisk will pull up multiple names. Like that last one, the HN, look at all of those names that it's now searching for. It's a great tool, especially if your family were immigrants, especially from non-English speaking countries. The enumerator is going to write down what they heard. So sometimes they'll hear the first sound and the last sound, and the middle is just a jumble. This can help you. And the question mark, you can use more than one in a search. Don't do that with the asterisk. It kind of freaks out a little bit. It gets a little grumpy. But the question mark, you can use multiple question marks within a name, and it will help you search for multiple examples. Make sense?
Mhm.
Not so scary. Okay. We're going to do a very quick case study. I want to kind of show you how this works. So we're going to look at my friend here, Mr. Walt Disney. He was born in 1901. So the first census he would appear on would be the 1910 census. So I went to Ancestry on that search up at the top. I clicked Census and Voter List. All the way on the right side, I clicked the US Federal Census. I can't remember the exact wording. Scroll down, click 1910. So now I'm only searching 1910. He was born in 1901 in Chicago, which is in Cook County, Illinois. So I entered his name, just Walt Disney. I entered his birth, 1901 in Chicago. And then I know the names of his parents. His dad's name was Elias. Mom's name was Flora. And I hit search. And it brought me here. So over here on the left, it shows you what it's searching for. And if you notice, there's kind of a scale that you can adjust. So here's kind of what that means. Right now, the search for Walt is very, very broad. So it's going to search for Walt, Walter, Herb, all kinds of different names that may or may not kind of sort of look like Walt. You can make it more and more accurate by scrolling further over to the right. So I just pulled up that one up here. So you're going to get exact for Walt, sounds like and similar to Walt. So if it's initials, if it sounds like Walt, Bert would probably appear in there. I put that he was born in 1901. You can adjust the year, so you can start getting plus or minus 5 years, plus or minus 10 years. And the location, that's the one that I go to first. When I'm playing with the census record, I will adjust that one a lot more quickly than some of the others. I believe Wikipedia says he was born in Chicago. I believe that that's true. But if I wanted to, right now it's just very, very broad. I think right now it's just searching in the United States. You can narrow it down so it searches just the state of Illinois. You can search just Cook County and the counties around it, or you can search for this exact county. So you can fiddle around with it. And that's good to know if you get a lot of results this particular search only got 19 results. I feel like worst case scenario, I can look through 19 different images to see if I find my person. So these were the first couple of results from that page, just a little bit bigger. The name matches, right? Walter rather than Walt. His parents' names match. Says he was born in 1902. Wikipedia said 1901, but this is close enough. And Illinois, that made sense to me. I would not have thought to look in the state of Missouri in 1910. I would have started looking in Illinois. So sometimes that's why it's nice to leave the search more broad for location. But there are enough commonalities here that I think this is probably my guy. So I click on that view record button and it pulls up our census here. So up on the top left, it is showing you where this census was enumerated. It's in the state of Missouri, the county of Lynn, and Marceline Township. I didn't highlight it. Let's see. I don't know if you can see it or not, but up at the very top right, it lists the enumeration district. So if you wanted to go and like see exactly where he lived, you could pull up, go to the National Archive, pull up the enumeration maps for this area, and it's enumeration district 84, I think is what it says. So that's another thing that you can check. Here's my column. And I went and I pulled up the blank form so that I could see a little bit easier what each column states, because this is old and the ink kind of blends together a little bit. This column is familiar to all of us, right? This is the names of the people who are living in the house as of April 15th, 1910. So you've got dad and mom, Elias and Flora, and then Roy, Walter, and Ruth are also living in the household. The next section is going to give you the relationships. So Elias was the head of the household. Flora was his wife. Roy and Walter were sons, and Ruth there was a daughter. And then it starts giving you other information, their physical characteristics. So it gives you their gender, it gives you their race. The ones that you're going to see most typically in that race column, you will see a W for white, a B for black, or an MU for mulatto, which was mixed race. You might start seeing other things. You might start seeing I for Indian if you're looking at Native American research. Sometimes if you're looking in communities that were highly Asian, you might see references that today would be considered very racist, but at the time, that's just how they identified individuals. But typically you'll see a W, a B, or an MU. It gives you their age. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. People lied about their ages, right? Want to look a little younger, I don't know. Next column over is marital status. It always cracks me up when they feel the need to list the marital status of children, but they do. And you will see M for married, S for single, W for widowed. As you get further and further in time, you might see NM for never married or D for divorced. I think once they start using S as like separated, they would use NM for never married rather than for S for single or separated. So it kind of helps just to know what you're looking at. Look at the rest of the page. It'll give you a clue.
Hello.
Did you have a question?
Hold on a sec.
Okay. The next column, this census asked how long the couple had been married. Not all of them do, but that is fantastic because then you know when to start looking for a marriage record, right? Oh, and this one is so good because they asked the mother in the family, how many children have you had and how many are still living? So that one is so good because in between 10 years, infant mortality was a thing. So you could tell if somebody is missing and you know you need to look for additional information. Over next, nativity. It's going to list their place of birth and then the birthplace of their father, the birthplace of their mother. So Elias here, that says CAN dot French and there's an O. So he was French Canadian. The O probably stands for Ontario. which makes sense, right? Because that's a very French-speaking province. Mom was born in Ohio. Her parents were from New York and Germany. And then the children were all born in Illinois. And this is cool because they're not in Illinois anymore, right? They're living in Missouri. So, sometime between when Ruth, who was 6, was born in 1910, they moved from Chicago to Missouri. So it helps you to narrow down when you're looking for other records. Citizenship, it will ask whether they were born in the US or not. This one is great because it asks what year they immigrated. So Elias came to the United States in 1878. The next column was he a naturalized citizen or an alien. This is fantastic because if they're naturalized, there's so much paperwork associated with becoming a United States citizen. Specifically, there's the Declaration of Intent. When they go to a courthouse and say, I want to start the process to become a United States citizen. And then there's all the paperwork that is generated when they actually become a citizen. So if you know when they came and that they're naturalized, you know that you can start looking for those records, and they provide just a gold mine of information about that individual, their parents, all kinds of stuff. And then it asks what language they speak. So clearly they all speak English. Elias probably also spoke French, but because he's now living in the United States, his primary language would be listed as English. It asks about occupation. So Elias was a farmer on a general farm. So it's not like specifically a dairy farm or a wheat farm. It's just general. And then that third column is EMP. He was employed during that year. Flora, I hate that it says none because she was a mom and she was working hard, but enumerators will be enumerators. Finally, they ask about their education. This only lists 2 columns, can read and write, and were they attending school. The actual census broke it up into 3 separate columns. Can they read? Can they write? Were they attending school? So just gives you a little kind of a glimpse into what the family life may have been like. If parents were not literate, that helps you to understand, maybe I'm not going to find records in this place, or maybe information isn't as accurate. They can't read it to check it, right? So it just kind of gives you clues to look at. And then it asks about their property, where they were living. So Elias owned his farm. It was mortgaged. Was it a farm or a house? That is a letter F, so it was a farm. And then that last column is the agricultural schedule. So that will get you back to the agricultural census, which will give you more information about Elias and his family and his farm. And that final column, were they a veteran of the Civil War? So this is before the Great War, right? The war to end all wars. Elias may not have even been asked that question because he was not from the United States. He was from Canada and didn't come to the United States until 1878. But if they were military, that's fantastic information to know because the military kept a lot of records. There are pensions and all kinds of things that you can start to search for. We're going to work now with the 1940 census, again with Mr. Walt Disney. His birthplace and birth year have not changed, but in 1940, he's now roughly 38, 39. He's not going to be living at home anymore. He's married, and so I'm going to search for him with his spouse, whose name is Lillian. So that pulls this up again, and you can adjust the markers if you get a lot of results. But Disney is not a particularly common surname. It only netted 20. So that's a doable amount. That's a searchable amount. So he is listed up here, Walt Disney, married to Lillian, born about 1902 in Illinois, but now living in Los Angeles, California. And knowing what we know about Mr. Disney, that makes sense. So I'm going to click on that view record, and this is the first thing that it pulls up. So this census is great because on the side here, it's going to give you his address. So the street name is written going up and down on the side. So that is Waking Way. And then that first box with the number, what is that, 4053? That's his house number. So he was living at 4053 Waking Way in Los Angeles, California. So if it's more recent, there are going to be maps available. You can go and see exactly where they lived. It's just fun information to have. And over here, this is the next box. Did they own or rent their home? That O means he owned his home that at the time was worth $40,000. And if you look at his neighbors, you've got $12,500 and $12,000 was the worth of their home. So Mr. Disney was kind of living large in 1940. What did I have next? Okay, it shows you the enumerator. So in this case, Lillian was the enumerator for the family, but also living in this household, you have a couple of servants. So it shows you that one of the servants provided the information about the people who were living as servants within his home. So coming back here, it gives you this information about Walt Disney and his family that no, were they attending school or not? I don't think I included that, but that's what the no means. What other information? It shows you how much schooling they completed. So next to Walt on that line, it says H1, which means he completed 1 year of high school. His wife completed all 4 years of high school. This is fun. You can go back and look at yearbooks, see if you can find their picture. It's just fun to look at. And then pulling up, if you keep going further down the line, this is where were they living in 1935. So for 3 of the 4, they were living in the same house. The youngest, Sharon, she was only 3 years old, so she was not alive in 1935, which is why her column is blank. What was his occupation? He was a motion picture producer with his own business. So that's just fun. I think 1940 was the year that Pinocchio came out. I think Snow White and Fantasia had already been released and were hugely successful for Mr. Disney. So, all right, very, very quickly, because we are almost out of time, census records overseas, because if you live in the United States, eventually you're going to hop the pond and you're going to need to know how to search other countries. So I just put a little bit very quickly together. Germany kept records every 5 years between 1875 and 1910. Then they started getting into some shenanigans, world wars, and all kinds of nonsense. So they stopped keeping their census records, and it's been very hit and miss since then. Their last official census record was done in 1987, which is before the fall of the Berlin Wall. So I didn't look to see if they have the census for East Germany and West Germany at that time, but that's the last one that they have done, which stinks, but the Germans kept great church records. So there are other, don't get discouraged. Let's talk about France. France did theirs every 5 years between 1836 and 1936, with a couple of very minor exceptions. But modern censuses are not regulated. They kind of do what they want to do. France has some very strong rules about privacy and protection. DNA tests for genetic genealogy are illegal in France. It's considered an invasion of privacy. So they're very, very particular about some of their privacy law. So they're not regulated at all anymore. It's just go and see what you can find. Some records go all the way back to 1590, which is amazing, but don't get too excited because it doesn't list names. It's more statistical data than names. England, oh, we love England. They started keeping census records in 1841, and they kept doing them every 10 years until 1921 in years that ended in a 1. Unfortunately, 1931 was destroyed by fire, and they didn't do one in 1941 because they were kind of in the middle of World War II. So they didn't do them either of those years. They did begin keeping them again in 1951, but their census records, ours are protected for 72 years. They locked theirs down for 100 years. So we are not going to get any new census records from England until 2051. But again, lots of church, the English taxed everything and everybody. So don't get discouraged if you can't find them on a census. There's tons of other things you can find English ancestors on. Scotland, they did theirs every 10 years again, starting in 1941 through 1921. They're all viewable years that end in 1. 1941 was not kept again because of World War II. Ireland is just rough, guys. If you have Irish ancestors, you know, it's just hard. They began keeping their censuses in 1821, and they did them through 1911 every 10 years. But 1821 to 1851 were all destroyed in a fire. 1861 through 1891 were probably pulped because there was a need for paper during the World Wars. So they destroyed their census records to provide paper. And then 1921 was canceled because Ireland was in the middle of their civil war. So you've got 1901 and 1911. Ireland is just tough. Their church records are, a lot has been destroyed, you guys. I'm so sorry if you have Irish ancestry. It's gonna be hard. Canada, they did theirs every 10 years, ending in a 1, starting in 1871. So they were a little bit later to the game. But they do theirs every 5 years, which is amazing. Up through they did every 10 years until 1971, and then every 5 years since then. The original census did not include the whole country. It was just part of it. But since then, whole country, it's great. It's wonderful. That is my presentation. So what questions do you have about census records? Let's not all speak at once. I just covered everything so well that nobody has any questions. Oh, okay. So Quakers are a whole different ballgame. Yeah. Okay, so Irish ancestry, they found church records, but their ancestor was a Quaker. And if you guys have Quaker ancestry, they're so good. They kept so many, their records have records. So, but just in general, church records, a lot of their civil registration, which is the birth, marriage, and death, a lot of those were destroyed in a bombing and a fire. See, I tried to combine those and came up with fire. During their civil war, there was a huge fire in their archive, and it destroyed just so many of their records. And because they all use like the same 5 names, it's so hard. Irish ancestry is just hard. But yeah, Quakers they're fantastic. Their records are so good. Really? That's super cool. So at the time, they held their Quaker meetings in her ancestor's home, which is
neat.
Right?
That's cool.
And it's still standing, which you will not find in the United States. We tear stuff down all the time, but
Wow.
that's so good. See, that's
Rachel has a question.
Go ahead.
Regarding enumeration districts, I really haven't gotten into them. Are the enumeration districts for 1940 and 1950 for the different censuses, are they different numbers for those different? And then how do you, well, I don't know, what, the National Archives, you said you would go enumeration district for 1940 and enumeration district for 1950?
Yes. Once you can Google enumeration district maps and it will pull it up. And then if I'm remembering correctly, you can search by location. So you can search the county. The more information you know about your ancestor, the better. So if you know, if you find the enumeration number on the census, it makes it easier. Otherwise, you're just looking at a map.
And
So,
what year did they start that?
Enumeration district? Oh gosh, like I want to say from the beginning, but don't quote me on that. I would need to check.
Wow.
It's early
Good.
days. early days that they started that.
Okay, thank you.
And it can be fun, especially once you hop the pond, because some of those older places are still intact. You can go on Google Maps on their street view and navigate to where their house was and see. Sometimes you can even find their house. It's still standing. So it's just fun to go through. And if you have their address from like the 1940 census, enumerators were not always great about recording addresses because that would have made it easy. So sometimes you might get a house number but no street, or a street but no house number. Sometimes you don't get either. Sometimes the one that you're looking for is the one with the ink blot on top. Hi guys. So yeah. Any other questions, problems, concerns? Yeah.
Where do you find agricultural census?
I Googled it. You should be able to find them through Ancestry. I had a difficult time even finding state census records, though. I think if you know the agricultural census, then you should be able to go on Ancestry and look it up that way. Just agricultural census, this county number 12, and it should help you find it. If that doesn't work, come on down and we'll figure it out together. It'll be fun. All right. Well, thank you for coming.